Welcome back to the RBR Recap, episode 5. I'm Alex Burgos, joined as always by Gabe Rivas. Today we have a special guest, Sebastian Milo, social media manager for DAZN. How are you, Sebastian?
Doing well. Happy after this fight week, and just glad to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining us. Gabe, how are you?
I'm doing well. Just drove 2.5 hours home after being in San Diego. And then last night, it took us like 3 hours to get across the border. So it's been a trek, but I'm finally happy to be home.
Hardest working man in boxing, then. That's what she's saying. Well, let's get to it, man. Let's jump right into the fight that you guys were ringside for. That's the Jaime Munguia versus Demetrius-Ballard fight. That was a scheduled 12-round bout for Munguia's WBO Intercontinental middleweight title. The fight got off to a pretty, slow measured pace. We saw Munguia come out patient, which is not normally the case. I thought Ballard won the first round. He came out with a good jab. And, you start to think round one goes through and you're like, okay, well, Munguia had a little bit of issues seemingly with the weight. This could get interesting, but, as the saying goes, life comes at you fast. And so Munguia picked it up in rounds 2 and 3. And in the third, he dropped Ballard. To Ballard's credit, he got up and he tried to do what he could, but it was just a barrage of power punches, forcing the ref to stop it at 147 in round 3. And so Munguia improves to 39-0. And now what we kind of heard from everyone, from the DAZN commentating team to people online commenting on Instagram posts and Twitter and the like, it was, great win for Munguia, great stoppage, but, and that but is, we want to see him face someone at a higher caliber. And so, those names may be, the Charlo, Triple G, Demetrius Andrade, any one of those guys. And so, Sebastian, I want to kick it to you first. What were your thoughts, not just on Munguia's performance, but maybe how the whole tone of the fight went? Because I feel like maybe we got more questions than answers from Jaime Munguia.
Well, I think the big question of the week really was, can he make the weight? I mean, during the entire fight week, he just looked tremendously drained. And at one point, he didn't collapse. He cleared it up during fighter meetings, but he just laid down to take a break, to take a rest. But the whole week, it was a bit scary because I didn't think he was ready to make that weight. And I was a little worried if the fight was going to even happen or continue. But, I'm glad it did. And nonetheless, it was a good performance by Munguia. But like you mentioned, after 38 fights, this being his 39th fight, it's time to step up. I mean, I love Munguia. And he did do some great things. For example, he was strategic in the beginning. While a lot of people want to see him come out aggressive and throw the shots, I thought he was very composed from the start. He was analyzing, just feeling out Ballard. And I thought that was a very smart thing for Munguia to do, especially if we do want him to move up and face those big names after this. He has to be smart when he fights. And I thought the way he did it against Ballard was a good way to go. And he picked it up in the next coming rounds, of course. He started throwing his power shots again, going to the body, opening up the head. And when he had Ballard against the ropes, it was a done deal for Ballard. I mean, there was no coming back from that. And Munguia stole the show. He closed the deal in his hometown. And great performance. But I do want to see him step up a little bit after all these fights.
Definitely. Gabe, we spoke about this pre-fight, the kind of transformation that Munguia has made with Eric Morales in his corner. And so, Sebastian, you touched on that as well, how he came out in round 1. So you like to see that because that's the evolution of a fighter. You're not just going to always come out and overwhelm your guy and start winging punches and take him out of there. So that was good to see that. But I think the weight is an issue that a lot of people want to discuss. And so I'll pull one comment off of our Instagram post by Felipe Coronel, aka Immortal Technique, hip hop legend. So he said he almost passed out making weight. He's a tough kid. He should move up to 168. The dude hits like a truck. So, a lot of people like to see this power, this exciting style, but it's like, what can we expect from him? What were your impressions, not only during fight week, but how he performed during the fight, Gabe?
Obviously, it was an excellent performance. You're seeing more of the improvements that he's made with Eric Morales. I believe this was his 5th fight at middleweight. He had fights against O'Sullivan, Zerameta, Toriano Johnson, Gabe Rosado, and now against Demetrius Ballard. You get the feeling that a few years ago, he would have struggled with the fighter like Demetrius Ballard, but he dispatched him within 3 rounds being intelligent. He said that the plan was to take the center of the ring and see what he was going to do. And that's something that he has learned from his team with Eric Morales, and his work with Eric Morales is to be more cerebral in there, to think, to strategize, and to also set traps that he can capitalize on. So he looked really good. He showed his jab. He showed his composure. He tried to set some traps. And when the corner told him to go forward and kind of throw more punches and work the body, he did it and ended the fight. So he looked good in that respect. But the story is, and you heard it from the DAZN broadcast team, you hear it from Sebastian and you as well, is that when is he going to step up in competition? I think after 5 fights, it's the right time to do it, because he was a work in progress when he was at 154 pounds. The opportunity came out of nowhere when Liam Smith became sick in 2018 and had to be replaced by Jaime Munguia to fight Saddam Ali. And like a month or 2 prior to that, he was ready to fight Triple G. So if you ask Jaime Munguia, he's going to tell you, I want to fight the best. But he has to have his career managed intelligently, and that's what's been going on with his managers and his promoters. And so he went the route of becoming champion at 154, defended it a few times, moved up to 160, and now we're slowly seeing him develop into really a top contender at middleweight. Now he's ranked at #1 in the WBC, and he's ranked at #1 in the WBO. Who are the champions? Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade. And in order to see what his next step is going to be, we have to figure out who's going to win the Canelo sweepstakes next week. If Jermall Charlo gets a chance to fight Canelo, he'll move up to 168. And then Jaime Munguia could fight for a vacant title against another one of the top contenders. So that might be a possible route. And then we're seeing with Demetrius Andrade, I can't remember where I saw it, but depending on what Canelo's next move, Demetrius Andrade might move up to 168. So yeah, I mean, he could be in line to face for either the WBO or the WBC title without even fighting those fighters. So we'll have to see what happens.
Now, let me ask you one thing, though. You mentioned 2 kind of different scenarios, him fighting for a vacant title and him fighting an actual upper echelon fighter. Now, if I'm his management, yes, I love, that scenario, and I wait around and maybe try to grab the opportunity for him to get a legitimate title against, a guy that's maybe a rung lower. Now, is that going to satisfy the fans, though, Gabe? Munguia gets an opportunity to get a vacant WBC or WBO title. I don't think so.
I don't think it'll satisfy the fans, and it's definitely not going to satisfy his critics. However, you could still have very exciting fights with Jaime Munguia and other top 10 fighters within the WBC or the WBO rankings. I'm thinking Carlos Adames, Sergey Derevianchenko. These are a few of the fighters in the WBC rankings whom he could face, and they're ranked in the WBO. So also Kanat Islam, who's fighting next week as well. So these are legitimate middleweight fighters. Some of them who have decorated amateur backgrounds, who can really give him a tough fight if he decides to go the route of, all right, we're going to fight for a vacant title, and we still want to fight a very legitimate top 10 opponent. I guess the decision that would most keep the fans happy would be to fight against Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade, but those guys are looking for fights against Canelo Alvarez as well, even though they would welcome an opportunity with Jaime Munguia. But again, there are promotional barriers with Jermall Charlo. With Demetrius Andrade, it's a little bit easier since he is with Matchroom and they have the relationship with DAZN and Golden Boy.
Right. Sebastian, let me kick that to you then. If he makes a legitimate effort to try to make that fight with Andrade and with Charlo, that'll probably satisfy the fans more so than maybe him waiting around for a vacant opportunity. I mean, Gabe, you mentioned Kanat Islam and some of those guys, but I just don't think that fans are like salivating for that matchup. I mean, because Munguia, even if he's not fighting for a title, I think there's names, that they would want to see him fight. I don't know, Sebastian, what are your thoughts on maybe what should be next for Munguia?
The thing is, there's a lot of fights I would like to see, and Gabe mentioned a lot of them. Even Munguia has called out that he wants Triple G at some point, right? But realistically, Triple G looks like unofficially he will be tied up this year with 2 fights on the calendar. So that's out of the question. And then, of course, like Gabe mentioned, he's #1 in the WL and WBC, which puts him in line for a title with Andrade, a title shot essentially with Andrade or against Charlo. The most realistic option out of all those, I do think, is in-house, obviously with, like what Gabe said, Matchroom for Andrade, Golden Boy with Munguia. For DAZN, it's the most feasible option to make, and it's one that I would like to see, and I think would satisfy the critics and the fans for both sides, actually, for Andrade and Munguia. So I think it's the best fight to make. However, I wouldn't be mad seeing him against Derevianchenko. You know, despite the losses, I still think he's a formidable opponent, somebody who would raise the status of Munguia as well. And I do think Munguia gets through him, but it's a good test. You know, it's a good step up. So ultimately, I think the fight to make is against Andre to satisfy the critics and everyone. But if he goes the avenue of fighting Derevianchenko, then it's not a bad test to make.
I'll throw in my 2 cents. I'll say I would love to see him fight Demetrius Andrade. I agree that that's the one probably promotionally easier to make and network-wise. If we're going down to a second option, I would say Carlos Adames, as you mentioned, Gabe. That would be my guy, and maybe for a vacant title. So also yesterday, and it was actually earlier in the day that took place in Manchester, we had a grudge match, 50 years in the making. Not that long, but it seemed many years in the making between Amir Khan and Kell Brook. It was a fight that was scheduled for 12 rounds, 149-pound catch weight. And I think a lot of people were maybe a little surprised about how one-sided it was. I mean, Kell Brook came out and just, you know, obliterated, kind of steamrolled Amir Khan, never let him get settled in and really do what he does best, which is, you know, the combinations, boxing, really using his athletic ability. I mean, he got, you know, taken off that track early on, and Amir Khan from round 1 was wobbled, and just throughout the fight, it just happened to it seemed to happen each round. He was doing okay boxing, and then one punch just kind of unsettled him. And so Kell Brook just kept the pace, kept coming forward, and dominated him, looked really good doing so, and stopped him in round 6. I thought both guys were professionals after the fight. I thought it was cool to see them at least just, you know, interacting and being able to discuss. I think Teddy Atlas mentions this a lot of times. It's like you have so much respect for your opponent after you get in the ring with them. And that's kind of one of the things that you saw with them, which was cool. But this fight and victory for Kell Brook really opens the door for a lot of opportunities. I just want to start, Sebastian, with you. What were your impressions of Kell Brook's performance and how he did against Amir Khan?
You know, I'm just happy this fight happened. I mean, it's 7 years too late. You know, obviously they're no longer in their prime, but there was a certain sense of nostalgia to this fight buildup, and I'm very happy that it finally happened. I mean, here's the thing: like Brook from the outset just absolutely dominated. There was no question. You can tell what the two strategies were. You know, Khan, it was a bit more of just opting for the speed as he usually does, while Brook was looking to land a little bit more of that one shot to send him to the ground, to the canvas. The thing is, like, I think Brook just looked to be the better fighter, the aggressor. He controlled the ring. He made Khan move to where he wanted him to move, and got him in his line of fire and just kept him there with that size. You know, Khan had all heart, but really no chin, no durability, no punch power. Every time Brook landed a punch, it looked like it was the end for Khan. And you saw that twice in that first round where 2 shots, both times, Khan's legs gave out from under him. So from the beginning, I just think Brook absolutely dominated. It was a brilliant performance by him. And I'm just surprised it went 6 rounds, to be honest. I think Khan would have been finished earlier by Brook. But the finish in the end was worth the wait.
Gabe, what were your impressions? I know you said before the fight it wasn't one that you were clamoring for, but you know, we were all kind of just interested because it was this grudge match. There was a lot of hype and everything before the fight. What were your impressions on the Amir Khan that we saw and the Kell Brook that we saw?
Right. As you mentioned, I wasn't exactly clamoring for this fight. And in our last recap, I did mention how the betting odds, I guess it was a little bit close. Kell Brook was the favorite and Khan was the underdog. However, we were in TJ. I was sitting with Sebastian. We were, enjoying some lunch, and then the fight came on. And then I started thinking about it, and I kind of backtracked a little bit. It's an exciting fight to watch, but now with regard to that, I started thinking about Khan's record and what he did in his career. At 135, he fought Barrera and Prescott, Bradis Prescott, the latter of which saw Khan getting knocked out brutally, right? And then at 140 is when we really saw the best of Amir Khan, fights against Marcos Maidana, Paulie Malignaggi, Zab Judah, losses against Lamont Peterson and Danny Garcia. I mean, this was really at the top of the division and the top of his game as a fighter. But at 147, what did he really do for us, Amir Khan? Did he really do anything at 147 to merit him being on a level playing field with Kell Brook going into this fight? And then I started thinking that I started remembering that Kell Brook was a career welterweight. He spent his entire career at welterweight, and it looks like he cuts down to welterweight. So I thought that, all right, going into this fight, it's going to be, they're walking into the ring. I'm thinking, all right, Kell Brook's going to have a huge size advantage. He's going to look bigger. He's going to look stronger. And as soon as he took the center of the ring, you can see how much of an advantage he had. He looked so much bigger. He looked so much stronger. He could easily back up Amir Khan. And it showed that, you know, it was a great rivalry in terms of the back and forth, but in terms of two welterweights fighting against each other, that's not what it was. Amir Khan's best moments were at 140, and he was a little bit too small. Not to take anything away from Kell Brook's performance and his win, but you know, given all of what I just said, now looking back, it looks so clear that Amir Khan had no chance of winning this fight. And so I think a few seconds before the first bell rang, I saw this. I said, this isn't going past 4 rounds. I can't remember. I think it ended in like the 6th round. But in terms of, you know, in terms of an analysis, I mean, those are my thoughts. And then moving forward, I'd like to see, you know, what Kell Brook has to offer the welterweight division. You know, fights like Jaron Ennis could be a possibility. And so it'll be interesting to see where he takes his career following his fight.
Definitely, yeah. Before we transition into possibly what's next for Kell Brook, I just want to mention Amir Khan, you know, had such an up and down career and seems like more, you know, potential than what was actually, you know, accomplished. He had some great victories. I mean, his resume, like you mentioned, is pretty incredible. And not to mention, he moved up and faced Canelo Alvarez. And, you know, obviously we all remember the brutal knockout, but just to have the balls to even move up and, oh, by the way, win a bunch of those first rounds. And so I think I mean, even myself, I'm like, if he could tune in and, you know, kind of throw it back and do a little bit of that versus Brook, oh, hell yeah, he can win this fight. But his punch resistance just wasn't there. I mean, credit to Brook, but I thought, you know, Khan, when we look back on his career, you got to give him credit for a bunch of the stuff that he did, the wins, the losses, and just the chances that he took.
Absolutely. And the balls, the toughness. I mean, the fight against Marcos Maidana, getting hurt so many times and being able to survive, as you mentioned, being able to step up and face Canelo Alvarez, a much bigger guy, win some of those early rounds and take those chances, even against someone like Terrence Crawford, who at 147 is an absolute killer. It says a lot about his courage that he understands and he knows that he has problems with punch resistance, but he still takes on hard-hitting fighters. It says a lot about his character.
Sebastian, I want to pull up a graphic from DAZN, actually, a quote that Conor Benn made after the fight. And I would assume that this is probably highest on Kell Brook's list and maybe on his radar, just because it would be a huge UK fight. And this is something that Conor Benn said after the fight. I would fight him at 150 pounds, talking about Kell Brook. It don't bother me. That's me challenging myself against a former world champion who claims to be the best. Idols to rivals. That's what it is. This fight piques my interest, especially more so than like a Conor Benn, Chris Eubank fight, which was mentioned a couple of weeks ago. I mean, that weight disparity is just a lot. But what are your thoughts on maybe what's next for Kell Brook? And is this fight maybe at the top of that list?
Don't get me wrong. I think that is a fight that would transcend the sport a little bit, especially in the UK. Would do great numbers. You're looking at the coming new generation in Ben, and then a guy towards the latter part of his career in Brook, who's done amazing things nonetheless. But I do feel that Brook's future is a bit undecided. I mean, in his post-fight press conference, he did say, and this is his quote, "I'm the flavor of the month again. I'm the man. They'll have to get in line again, depending on what I want to do. That's going to be the thing. I'm just going to enjoy this win, spend time with the family." But throughout a lot of that, he was kind of hinting at like, I'm uncertain where I want to go next. I'm going to think it through, analyze this performance, and see what's next for my career. You know, and as Gabe mentioned, you know, he's not struggling to make weight, but he cuts down to get to 147. I actually do think there's some good options at 154. I would actually like to see him against Liam Smith. That's somebody I would like to see him fight. I think that's the best next step for him. It's a fight that he can win. The Ben fight, I think Ben overpowers him. I think just the youth is going to be too effective for him. The fight I would like to see is Liam Smith. That ultimately I think is the best option for Kell Brook if he continues to move on in his career.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head right there at the end. If he decides to continue moving with his career, because this may be one of these things where he's like, I know what I was getting with Amir Khan. Damaged goods. I feel like I could win that fight. do I really want, you know, and even against guys that may not be at the top level, is that going to be enough to amp him up, to get him ready, to get him at his best at this point? It's kind of like a Deontay Wilder thing. It's like when you've been to that mountaintop and then now they're asking you to take on guys that maybe won't do it for you. It's not going to, you know, get you in that shape and in that mindset that you need to be. There's 17, 18 years worth of animosity here with Amir Khan. I mean, he would have woke up and fought him any day of the week, you know, and been prepared to do so. So I think maybe Conor Benn a little bit, just because of the domestic, you know, thing going on there, might be able to get to that level. But I wouldn't mind, you know, just for his personal health, if he's like, hey, I'm going to ride off into the sunset after this big win, the one that I've been trying to get for so long, you know, and then just kind of take on new challenges for himself in his life. But I do still think that if he can motivate himself to get to that higher level, he still competes with a lot of these guys and some of the ones that you mentioned.
The biggest variable for Brook is himself. Ultimately, it's his mindset if he wants to continue. Look, he's been at the mountaintop, like you said, so there's no reason why he can't get back to it. But at the same time, we don't need him to get back to it. You know, if he chooses to retire after this, I think all of us will look back at his career and be grateful of everything that Kell Brook has done in this sport. So I'm not mad whichever way he goes. I think there's plenty of options with Ben or with Liam Smith or at 154, or even if he chooses to stay at 147. But if he does retire, this was the right way to go out for sure.
Definitely. And also shout out to Kell Brook for having the balls to go up and face Triple G when
man.
no one would as well. I got to throw that in there, man. Gabe, but what do you think real quick about that Conor Benn fight? I mean, is that something you'd want to see as well?
Well, like you both mentioned, it all depends on what Kell Brook wants to do. I was there ringside when he faced Sean Porter and defeated him for the IBF welterweight title. Spectacular win for him, spectacular win for his career and for the UK. He made some interesting choices, like you said, to move up and fight Triple G at a time when really he was struggling to find opponents. And then the tough loss against Errol Spence. So he's had an excellent career. It all depends on what he wants to do. If he wants to take the Conor Benn fight, I mean, it's a situation where it's the guy who's in the latter part of his career taking on a young, hungry lion in the UK, and it's a changing of the guards, right? If he takes on Liam Smith, it's at 154 pounds. The weight cut's going to be easier. It's at a guy who's perhaps at a similar age and a similar stage in his life and in his career. We have to see how he does against Jesse Vargas, but that could be a good fight. What he could also do is do something similar to what he did with Errol Spence Jr. and fight another hungry lion in Jaron Ennis. And because Jaron Ennis has really been clamoring for a breakout fight and a fight against a top welterweight in order to show everyone that he is a legitimate fighter in that division, that everyone knows he's a top talent, but to show that he's at the next level and can be a world champion. So there are a lot of options. Personally, I would like either him to face Liam Smith in the UK, or if he wants to, call it a career. The tougher options would be to face a Conor Benn or a Jaron Ennis. But I mean, as we saw in his career, if he's willing to move up and fight Triple G and an undefeated Triple G, then maybe he's crazy enough to face Jaron Ennis or Conor Benn.
Definitely. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what he decides to do. For now, he's got to enjoy that victory over Amir Khan. Kudos to both guys for making that fight happen. At least we got to see it, and it was fun to watch. For Sebastian Milo and for Gabe Rivas, I'm Alex Burgos. Thanks for tuning in to the RBR recap. We'll be back next week. Peace.